I'm Nicole Nelson, and I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services. And our program is a statewide program. And for those of you who haven't heard this before, again, Alaska is this huge, enormous state that is bigger than the next 3 states combined. So California, Texas, and Montana. And we have very low population density. We have 13 offices across the state right now, and they're in our bigger hub communities. But only 4 of those offices are road connected, which means in all other communities, people need to fly into those communities. And one of the things I'm real proud of in the last year is that even though we face, like every other legal aid organization that I know, we're turning away more people than we want to all the time, we were able to serve folks in over 212 communities in Alaska in the last year. 90% of those were not road connected. They're in small villages. And I'm really proud of that fact. And another fact that I'm really proud of is that in 2017, when our community, with the guidance of our Supreme Court, came together to do an asset mapping exercise to understand our justice landscape, they found out that Alaska Legal Services was the most referred to legal entity in the state. We were more referred to than the court system, than the police, than anyone else. If people had a legal problem, they came to us first. And this makes me really proud. But of course, we're not able to reach the populations that we want to, or the people that we are able to. But while I take such great pride in our ability to get services out to far-flung places, I know that we don't do it alone. It's not alone. It's through partnerships. And that's the way that Alaska Legal Services has been doing its work since we opened our doors in 1967. And it's been sort of the bread and butter of our work since the time when Justice Bolger was part of our organization. And so today, what we're going to talk about is with a number of other folks about community partnerships and why they're important in rural service delivery, and also why they're, to put it frankly, quite natural there. I think that there's something in our remote communities where we understand that we cannot exist on our own interests alone, and that these community partnerships are born out of that. And I will say, before we start talking about with our esteemed panelists, that one of the things that when I talked about Alaska Legal Services statewide footprint of 13 offices, I want to point out that it was diminished in 1996 when there was a great loss of funding for legal services programs, and we had to retrench our footprint, and we're limited to about 5 offices. But over the course of the last 15, 20 years, we were able to regrow that and regain our statewide footprint simply because of the partnerships we had from the communities that had relied on us and us relying on them. So we began to embed our attorneys in organizations, in the tribally operated nonprofits, in domestic violence shelters, within the tribally operated healthcare system. And again, those partnerships sustain us much in the way that we're helping the communities there too. So I'm really excited to be leading this conversation today, and talking with my fellow panelists about the great work that they're doing and how they are building and sustaining the partnerships within their communities, which I think is essential, absolutely essential to rural service delivery. And so to get started, I am joined today. I want to mention that Rudy Sanchez, who is my colleague from DNA Legal Services, who is on Navajo, was unable to, his flight got canceled coming out of Dallas. So I miss Rudy, and I'm sending him love wherever he's at. And we are joined by Jen Cuesta from Rural Pro Bono Program Attorney at Colorado Legal Services. We have Krista Higgins, who is the Director of Advancement at the Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. Helen Graytal, who is the Director of Beyond Opioids Project at the Center for Arkansas Legal Services. And Kate White, who is an Access to Services Manager at the Legal Aid of West Virginia. And I'm going to, I think we will just start at this end of the panel with Kate, and have each of you just give a brief overview of your rural community and let us know a little bit about the geographic region that you're serving, what your partnership looks like, and what you're trying to solve with that partnership.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So West Virginia is a state of about 1.8 million people, and it is very, very mountainous. We are the mountain state. And so our largest city has under 50,000 people. So we are a very rural state. And the project that I'm talking about is our Lawyer in the School program. And we actually started that program in a more urban setting in Charleston, West Virginia, actually thanks to LSC and a Pro Bono Innovation Fund grant. But have expanded that program out to rural areas. We're in 7 counties, and we partner with public school systems. Usually we start with the school and then work with the county school system, which is how our schools are organized in West Virginia, to offer in-person clinics and or referrals for their staff to help families that are navigating civil legal issues. And I think the reason that we sought schools out for partnership is that around 2016 or 2017, there was a lot of attention about trauma in kids and schools and teachers not knowing what to do and how to handle situations. And there were a number of programs that were popping up in our schools to help kids, to help families. And, it felt like some of the issues that were being raised around homelessness, around domestic violence, were very much things that we as civil legal aid lawyers know how to handle. But in a lot of the counties and places where we work, with the schools we work, they didn't really know about legal aid or what we can do or how those issues might impact their families. And so it was a way to meet families where they are, meet them. We're mostly in elementary schools, and that's a place where there's a lot of parent engagement. So it's one to meet families in a place where they know. And we often target schools where there are a number of other services like healthcare services, health centers, mental health counseling, but also to let school staff know about what legal aid does and who we are and actually how those issues can impact their students. As you can imagine, you get evicted, probably not going to have your homework done when you go to school the next day. Or if you're facing domestic violence in your household, you're not going to maybe be able to focus or might fall asleep during school. And so we were able to start in that way and then really work with the schools and build out from there and work with the partners that are in schools. A lot of the nonprofits and social services that were part of those school hubs are also big referrers for families to us.
Great. That's a fantastic program. Hearing about that. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about yours?
So I work with Colorado Legal Services. Like Alaska, we're a statewide program. So we have 13 offices, 11 of which are in non-metropolitan communities. And for that reason, in 2015, CLS applied for the first year of the Pro Bono Innovation Fund grant, and we got it. And the goal of that grant was to create 5 rural clinics that use metropolitan attorneys and technology to bridge the geographic gap to bolster our capacity with our rural offices. And so I was hired to do that and just that overarching goal, and approached it also using asset mapping. I think it's a really great bottom up program development tool that also really creates a lot of natural partnerships. And in that process, though, I did recognize there were a couple communities that shared 2 characteristics. And it was that they were communities that were a little more isolated. And so would really benefit from having a physical location in the communities to go to where they could access legal services. And that would increase the likelihood of them accessing those legal services. And also they were still slightly big enough that we could reasonably expect people to be able to access a library without having to drive too far. And so we recognized that in 3 of our communities. And so then we started looking for that brick and mortar partner, and our natural partner was libraries. I know that's something that probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. Libraries are a phenomenal partner, and 3 big reasons I think of. Is first that the resources they already have available that are funded. They have a space. A lot of them have a little study room, so you have a way to provide confidentiality. They have staff. They have, and also tech. A lot of places, the library is a very volatile place for community Wi-Fi in communities that otherwise don't have that infrastructure. And also staff. And there's also huge mission alignment. Like, librarians want to bring knowledge to the community, and they know legal knowledge is lacking. So if you step in and say, hey, we can provide that knowledge, if you help us facilitate it. We've had one library say no to us, but otherwise every single other one has. And that was kind of a pretentious ski library, like ski town library. So, But otherwise, they want a partner. They know this is a knowledge that is needed by their community. So that mission alignment really helps and creates buy-in. And then also, because sustainability is always a question. If libraries are paid for, there are community resources that exist there. The staff is paid for, the space is built. So if you can just build on that infrastructure, it's a little easier to think about the financial sustainability of those models in the long run as well. And in the end too, it gave us, as a nonprofit that is trying to cover a massive amount of space, another physical touch point for some of these communities we're having trouble reaching. And so for a lot of those clinics, we may have someone come in and it may be a quick advice thing, but we also can use those clinics to identify people that need larger services from our other regional offices too, and reach out to them through that way. So in the end, it's worked really well. They've been wonderful partners, and it allowed us to serve those communities that really did benefit more from having a physical space in the community.
That's fantastic. I think I like this idea that the concept of natural allies, and then also making sure that you're asset mapping. So we understand what what resources are available, who has them. And I do think that especially in rural communities, the infrastructure is so thin oftentimes, figuring out where you can share, who already has what you need, and not duplicating those efforts is so important. Okay, let's hear over here. Let's see. Helen, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Helen Grittil, Director of Beyond Opioids in a statewide project in the state of Arkansas. And our project is about serving families and individuals who have been impacted by the opioid crisis and other substance use disorder. We started this project probably circa 2017. It wasn't solely focused on people with substance use disorder. At that time, I was an AmeriCorps volunteer for Legal Aid of Arkansas, and their leadership was in the midst of thinking of different ways of approaching their client population from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. So we started looking at data, at statistical data that indicates what makes an individual at high risks to be legal aid clients. And it all came down to adverse childhood experiences. At that time, Arkansas ranked second in the nation when it comes to ACEs score, with about 25% of its children exposed to toxic stress. And that means that they are likely to be our legal aid clients, chronic disease, and things of that nature. So at that time, we took advantage of a funding opportunity of $25,000 through the Children's Hospitals to start Legal Aid of Arkansas's ACEs program. And that ACEs program basically prioritizes families with children ages 0 to 5. And then the next year, I was in a different role as a development director, and a funding opportunity came from HRSA, which is the Health Resources and Service Administration. And they're giving out $200,000 for organizations wanting to bring resources to rural communities that are impacted by the opioid crisis. And so we took advantage of that, and we are so proud to say that we are the first and probably the only law firm that has received that rural health funding. So with that $200,000 for 1 year, what we did is we did a needs assessment, and it led to us to expand our priorities to provide services that we didn't used to, like driver's license reinstatement. More important, what we did is to use that $200,000 to do internal buy-in. There's a lot of pushback when we started to ask our staff to work with that population, right? The common response is, we're already doing God's work. Now you want us to do more. Right? But the truth is that whether or not our clients self-identify as people with substance use disorder, these are the clients we are already serving. And then the second part of that is getting community buy-in. And we were able to successfully do that by launching a symposium that was very well attended at that point. So that was in 2019. And then the next year, there was another funding opportunity from the planning grant to then implementation. Now it's $1 million. For over the course of 3 years. So we said, well, let's go for it, right? So we went for it, and then we doubled down. We said, why don't we invite Center for Arkansas Legal Services, the other legal aid program in Arkansas, so that we will have statewide coverage. At first they were hesitant, but then they joined us, and I work for them now, and we got $2 million to start this project. And so here we are. Since we launched September 1st, 2020, And since then, we have done, they ask us, what are the wins for the project? The number one win is the cultural shift, right? We are traditionally helping. In the past, we have used substance use disorder as a weapon on behalf of our clients. We are part of that punitive culture that punishes people who have that disease. Not anymore. We are their allies and we're their leaders, and we back that up through this funding. We have 4 fully dedicated staff attorneys for our SUD population. We do have an open position if anyone is looking for a job and wants to join our team. And then we have 1 full-time paralegal, and then a project director and another support staff. And in addition to that, to serve the people that are coming to us, all hands are on deck. Every case handler in CALS and Legal Aid of Arkansas help with this project. And since we started in the last 2 years, we have helped about 3,000 cases in a short amount of time. And the last part of it is that what is the biggest win is that we have enabled to access those clients in rural communities. We needed to gain community trust, and we were able to gain that by going to where they are, going to rural communities and letting people open their doors to us. So we were able to do that. And more importantly, of course, is being here to have the platform to inspire and empower every legal aid program tuning in the region and in the nation to start their own Beyond Opioids project.
It's inspiring. It's really inspiring. And I think a couple of things you touched on, which I really like about your project and sort of resonates, I think, with rural service delivery, is one, making sure that you're trusted allies, right? And I think Haley mentioned this before, that show up and suit up, being there, the consistent presence, and knowing that you can rely on folks, and also the holistic service delivery piece of this as well. It's really hard to, I think, particularly in remote communities, if you're not going to address all of the problems. You can't just say you're going to help somebody with one thing and then turn them away for the rest and build that trust. Okay, Krista, so tell us about your project.
I would love to. Again, I'm Krista Figgins. I'm with Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma. And we have been doing faith-based outreach, especially in rural parts of Oklahoma, really pretty much since 2017. We are a statewide program, and we have 77 counties in Oklahoma, and 60 of those counties are considered to be rural by the Office of Management and Budget and the USDA. So there's a large rural population. There's about 4 million people in Oklahoma. A little under 600,000 of those people live below the poverty level. 12% of Oklahoma adults are functionally illiterate. You are much more likely, the poverty rate amongst non-college educated people in Oklahoma is 27.2%. So it's a very poor state, 8th poorest in the country, and very, very rural. And the issue we have 18 offices around the state. They're geographically, located to try to reach as many areas as we can. The issue really becomes, I work in disaster response. And if you are trying to go into a rural community to help those folks and you don't have an office in that community, they don't know you. You can't do like peanuts and put up, the lawyers in 5 cents and sit up a card table in the corner in, Elk City, Oklahoma, because nobody's going to come talk to you because they don't know you. They don't trust you. I've sat in meetings in rural Oklahoma where a gentleman stood up and said, we don't want the city and the city doesn't want us. And the city is Oklahoma City. Everybody who doesn't live in Oklahoma City calls Oklahoma City the city, like there's only one, but there are more. But that's kind of the attitude. We don't need folks from the city coming out here and telling us how to, live our lives. So with disaster in Oklahoma, we've had 9 federally declared disasters in the last 10 years. We've had 25 disaster events since 2013, defining that as being an event that requires resources from outside of the community to recover. So we have a lot of practice dealing with disaster here. Oklahoma VOAD, voluntary organizations active in disaster. If you are not familiar with your state VOAD where you are, I would love to help you get familiar with them, because that is the group that is kind of the membership organization for all of the nonprofits and other entities that respond in times of disaster in your state. And it's there to really avoid duplication of benefits. The VOAD will usually set up what's called a multi-agency resource center, a MARC, in a community after a disaster has hit, assuming that the VOAD agencies that are involved actually have resources to put into that community. So we had a tornado hit in Elk City, Oklahoma in 2017. Elk City was locked down. There were police, barricades everywhere. You had to go to the mayor's office to get a permit to go into the city. And they really just weren't letting anybody in who wasn't really kind of a first responder agency. Well, Legal Aid's not a first responder agency. We are not lights and sirens. We don't go in on the backs of the fire trucks, although I wish we could to get ahead of the fraudulent contractors, but that's a whole nother story. But you get access generally, if you're not a first responder agency, through a multi-agency resource center that your VOAD sets up, or through a disaster recovery center if FEMA is involved because it's a large enough scale disaster event. If you don't have that, you really don't have a way to access those people. There's not a venue that's a trusted space where they know, oh, the Red Cross is at the door. We're safe if we come in here and we can talk to these folks. If you don't have that, you're going to really have a hard time getting into that community to help them because they don't know you, they don't trust you, and everybody doesn't like lawyers anyway. So it's kind of a problem. So in Elk City in 2017, I was kind of scratching my head about how to get there. I've never seen a disaster survivor who does not have a legal problem. I've been doing this for 10 years, and they usually have more than one. It's like an onion. You peel it, and there's always, another layer. So I knew there were people there who had problems, but how were we going to get in there? And the chair of the Oklahoma VOAD Emotional and Spiritual Care Committee, Reverend Mary Goodrow Hughes, she's been nationally involved in disaster response for over 25 years with MCOR and worked the Murrah bombing here in Oklahoma and Hurricane Katrina and helped write the guidelines for National VOAD Emotional and Spiritual Care. She's my really my therapist as far as disaster response is concerned. We talk through a lot of issues, and I said, I really don't know how I'm going to get into this community, Mary. And she said, well, I'm meeting with the Ministerial Alliance tomorrow, and you're going to come with me. And I thought, why did I never think of that? I mean, it was the biggest light bulb moment I've ever had, and it wasn't my moment, it was hers. She was the one who suggested it. So Mary took me, and we went in, and I met with 9 ministers that day, and I took them all of our disaster flyers, had long conversations with them. They were able to take those flyers back to their congregations and distribute them. It was every large faith community in the area was represented, and they were thrilled to get this information because they had been getting questions that they didn't know how to answer, and they didn't know who to refer people to. So that was kind of the impetus of us then going on to further talk about how to do faith-based outreach in Oklahoma, because it was very effective in that instance and has been ever since. Shortly after that, we were able to apply for one of the Midwest Legal Disaster Project grants through Cargill and through LSC. And we were able to write that into the grant, our faith-based outreach. And we are continuing to put that into grants to be funded because it's just a really excellent way to do outreach in Oklahoma. And there are lots of reasons why that is, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But and who is really served by this? The rural Oklahomans who need help. We have an incredibly high incidence of disaster, and we have a very large rural population. So it's not a question of if you're going to get hit by a tornado or a flood or straight line winds. It's a question of when it's going to happen. So whoever we can get this information to before the bad thing happens to help them be more resilient, that's the whole point, is to help people recover faster and better and be more resilient to the bad thing in the first place.
That's a great point. And I think that's, this idea of going where people are at already and tapping into the trusted resources that exist really resonates with me. I feel like, trying to figure out in our communities when we're trying to figure out how we're going to serve people. For us, we're trying to find those places, that sort of the linchpins of the community that people are already going to seek help from, and then trying to upscale them and give them the tools that they need to screen and surface the unmet legal needs that we know people might have, but they aren't identifying as such. And I think, Krista, that yours is such a good example of going where people are and trying to work with the trusted resources within the community already to figure out how you're going to connect those to a greater web of services. So for Helen and Kate, you both have partnerships that are with public agencies. And so that's a little different from those of us who are in a legal aid office. So can you tell me a little bit about how your collaboration formed? I think we've heard a little bit how they formed and why, but if how did those differ from the work of a legal aid organization? And tell us a little bit more about that. And Kate,
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the initial barriers we had in going into school is that in some of the counties where we are, the county school systems and the schools only see our staff, legal aid staff, on special education or IEP cases. So we have a unit of attorneys who help families through that system. And although, you hope it's not completely adversarial, there can be times where the school can interpret it that way and have to provide services. So one of the ways that we handled that was we said, our organization does that work. We have this, group of advocates that's very skilled at that. If a family were to come to our Learn the School staff, the staff that are in the school or the staff that, get the referrals from your school, we won't handle those ourselves. We'll let the family know that there are other folks in our organization and other organizations that provide those services. And the schools seem to really understand that and be okay with that. And so that kind of removed one of the initial barriers for them. We also had some, thoughts and concerns about maybe a parent hadn't had a great experience in school when they were a kid. Or we get a lot of kinship caregivers, grandparents, family members who are afraid if they come to the school and say, I'm caring for my grandchild, but I don't have legal custody of him or her, that the Child Protective Services might be called or that they might somehow get in trouble. And so we really worked with the schools and the staff and the families to identify, one, what we do is confidential. We're not going to tell the school necessarily what's going on. And we have different reporting requirements and rules about those kind of things than the school might have. But also, I think it was our constant presence in the school and working with the leadership in a school, whether that's the principal who knows every kid, the school nurse who's really dynamic and connects kids to services, the social worker, whoever it was, that person, there's at least one in a lot of schools. We really worked with them on that ground level to say, look, we're here to help. We're not here to hurt. We want to get families information. We want to get them services. And so the way we really go about doing that is we're there on a very regular basis for our clinics. We're there weekly, generally, and some we're monthly in our rural areas. We tend to go every other week. But we are also at every family event. So there's a trunk or treat, we're there. If there's a family engagement opportunity where the families come in for an award ceremony, we're there. If there are mentorship programs with, outside people coming in, we're one of them. We read to the students. One of our schools, the kids call us their lawyer. But the point is, those trust issues that can be there in rural communities around school, we wanted to overcome them by just saying, look, we're here. We're not some kind of presence that's just going to come in and be here for a year and leave. We are a part of your school. We're here to help. And not all families want to meet at the school, and that's okay. We accommodate, we work with them. But I'll tell you, if you give the family an opportunity in a rural area to meet 5 or 10 minutes from where they live, or to travel 2 counties over to where our local legal aid office is, guess where they're going to pick? They're going to pick the school they know. They're going to pick the place in their community. And in a lot of rural areas, where is the community come together? On Friday night at a high school football game, or it's at a school. And so again, I think, there are trust issues to overcome in terms of working with schools and educating them about the differences in terms of the things that we can do and can't do. But also working with the families to really on a ground level, get them to trust us. It takes time, and it's hard in rural areas, and COVID did not help.
Yeah, true. So true. And Helen, you have a bunch of different partners. Sometimes you're adversarial with. How do you handle that?
So it's a long-winded answer. So I'm gonna have at it. Before this project started, we did have existing litigation against the Department of Health Services, right? As it stands, one of our biggest partner right now is one of their, sub-departments, the Child Welfare Agency. And how that came about is basically leveraging existing resources with LSC's Equal Justice Work program on rural summer legal core, right? So we had the first summer of the project, we selected one uprising 2L, I believe. Her name is Addie Martin, and she happened to be a social worker for 3 years with DCFS before she went to law school. And she said, in the 3 years that I was working there, I did not know about legal aid and the services that you guys provide, which is odd because we've been here for over 50 years. But I think that's a common tale from people in the field. So she said, why don't we build that partnership? So we built on her relationship that she has developed over those 3 years. And we started with a small area with DCFS. And we went from there to having constant meetings with the head of DCFS. Those lawsuits would be mentioned a little bit like, please don't sue my boss. She's very nice. But the thing about partnerships is like, it's fertilizer, right? One partnership gives birth to another partnership. So then they led us to being partners with Parent Council. And recently we just presented to them at a state conference. And we now have keys to the kingdom and have direct access to all parent council in the state of Arkansas. Same with community corrections agencies. We started off with them. We just basically said who in the community serves the community that we serve. We want to partner with you. Yes, we want to partner with you. That gave way for our partnership with drug courts and specialty courts. So the short of the long is that the way you overcome the adversarial positions that we had before this project started is that you build a lot of other positive things where you could have a commonality. So right now, instead of us, an organization or one of our organizations in adversarial position with DHS, we are actually partners. So our focus more is on the positive than those issues.
Well, those are really good points. It sounds like just making sure you put the bonus points in your piggy bank for the relationship, yes. Right? We need to do that with our partnerships as well. And Jen, you touched on before we were talking, as you were building your program, you talked a little bit about the asset mapping that you did, or that was a part of choosing where you would, how you chose the sites where you located your libraries. Can you just explain a little bit about what asset mapping meant to you? And then also maybe tell us a little bit about how you adjusted during COVID when you weren't physically able to be where you needed to be.
Yeah. Like I said, we've kind of been hinting at it. Asset mapping is a program development policy or just approach. And it really asks you to approach a community and focus first on its assets before we look at its deficits, which it's hard with rural communities. The words, sparse or sparseness has been thrown out a lot, and there's just not a lot there, but there is stuff there. And kind of acknowledging that and approaching a community from that position as opposed to focusing on its deficits. And so you're really in that process, and it can look different for different organizations and different programs you're trying to develop, but you're just trying to get an understanding of what exists there. And that, an asset can be a physical, like an infrastructure thing, but it can also be relational. And it can also be organizational. And so for us, I had two different phases of it. The first was more research, just where were our greatest deficits between our eligible community members and the number of attorneys we had. And then from that, physically went to 5 different communities for a number of days and sat and just listened to people. I think a number of people have hinted at this, like when you're from the city, the last thing you want to do is go in and be like, let me help you solve your problem. Let me give you your solution. Because you're going to get shut down real quick.
You will clear a room.
Exactly. Yeah, they're going to be like, who are you? Please leave. And so this process allows you, I went in and I just set up interviews with anywhere from 6 to 8 people in the community, within the legal community. I asked the same questions, but I came in without an agenda. I didn't have an idea to sell them on. And I just listened to them, and always starting with the question, what are your assets? What is working really well? And then eventually moving on to, okay, where are the gaps? Because you need to know that. But And then you can take that knowledge, and from that, the models just came. Like, it's fascinating when you pool that community knowledge, how it was clear what tech would work where and what we needed to focus on, what legal issues from the communities. And I will say, like, just logistically, it's really nice because it guarantees your solutions. If by the time you get to the solutions, you know what is there, you're going to build on that. Like you said, you're building on the infrastructure that's there. You're also avoiding duplication because you know what's there. And for partnership building, it was incredible because once again, I was approaching these communities before I had a solution, and I was listening. And it built dialogue, it built trust, and also going there was huge. Driving there and taking the time to meet people in their community was very important. And then it also, when I did end up with a solution, it represented what they'd told me. So buy-in was really easy too. Because I was like, look, you told me this on this date. And then look at this, it's responding to that. And people got it. They felt like they were a part of the development of that program for their community based on their experience. So it really helped with buy-in. And then in terms of just, we recognized, obviously libraries as partners in some of our clinics. And then when COVID hit, because COVID, it's the worst. So all those libraries shut down, just like everyone did. And so those clinics stopped. And a lot of them, we haven't been able to start them back up because kind of what happened is it snowballed. The library shut down. And so they started letting go of staff and their hours got more limited. And then they've had trouble building up that support and infrastructure again. But with that said, they remained partners. And one thing we did learn from the process is the models that came from the asset mapping were distinct to each community, which meant, for certain communities, especially the frontier communities, like Allison had mentioned before, getting to a library is not a feasible thing. They are not populated enough. So we utilize the most readily available technology, which is phones. Everyone can mostly get to a phone in Colorado. And so the same month that our library clinic shut down, we were able to go to one of our other clinics, the Call for All, which was done in partnership with a firm in Denver, and say, hey, can we add 6 more counties? And they're like, yeah. And so we didn't have a county because of the diversity of tech that we'd used. We didn't have a county that didn't have a clinic for even 1 month because that diversity allowed us to shift. It had also made us recognize there's kind of 2 different clinic models. There's a replicable one, which has its value because it has a physical place in the community. But if you want to replicate it, you need to rebuild that whole infrastructure. So it's harder to replicate. And then there's an expandable model where you create a centralized infrastructure that can more readily expand quickly. And so I think the diversity both in tech, but as well as those different models, which I hadn't even realized we'd done just because I was following the asset mapping, really saved us during COVID. And those library partners, while we haven't been able to get the libraries up and going, everyone is game for it. Like everyone wants to. I'm continuing to just keep up that communication with those partners and touch base. And they're letting me know what's happening with their staffing, and I'm letting us know what's happening or them know what's happening with recruitment. And so I think even in a time like COVID, which is mass chaos, with partners, it is so important to just touch base sometimes, even if there's not really a tangible change to what's happening, but just letting them be like, hey, I know you're still out there. I haven't forgotten you. And so that's kind of what we learned.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the example of sort of the belt and suspenders type of like back up what you're doing and flexibility in the service areas. And it seems to me it's really based on this relationship building too and partnerships. So you can sustain some flexibility within your partnerships. As long as you keep that relationship solid, the methods can change. One thing that also resonated with me, I remembered I was trying to do a gap analysis at some point with one of our communities. And I heard somebody say to somebody else, thank goodness, just when people were asking about what they didn't have, somebody said, one of the community members, like, we don't need you to tell us the things we don't have. We already know those. So really starting from that space of pointing out the many benefits and the great things in our remote communities, I think is really important. Krista, I'd like to get back to you for a minute, if we could. And I know that you spoke about the partnerships that you have with faith-based communities. Are you doing disaster work with other partnerships?
Definitely. Again, with Oklahoma BOAD, we work
Could you tell us what BOAD is again?
voluntary organizations active in disaster. Every state has one. Some are more active than others. But National BOAD, the members of that are, the Salvation Army, Red Cross, Feeding America, the big nonprofits that really do a lot of disaster work around the country and around the world. In Oklahoma, members of Oklahoma BOAD, it's going to be State Emergency Management. We work with them quite a bit. FEMA is a partner. We work with them quite a bit. Lots of government agencies. Faith-based organizations are the backbone of disaster recovery, period, in Oklahoma and everywhere else. So the vast majority of them are going to be faith-based, but there are many that are not. The food pantries, we work with them during disaster. And again, the big case management agencies that we work with are going to be Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, the Lutherans. It's a lot of faith-based, but a lot of government as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Helen, so your project has many different partners across the state. When you're rolling it out to when you're expanding, how are you making sure that you maintain fidelity to the program program goals once you've established a new relationship?
So any partner that has access to the clients we're trying to serve is a good partner for us, right? It doesn't matter if we differ on different positions. For example, our funder, one of the core activities that we must perform under the $2 million grant is to expand the access to medication-assisted treatment for people with opioid use disorder. Now, this is a bit controversial with faith-based organizations. There are different paths to recovery, and our faith-based organizations are critical resources for our client population. Most of these facilities have an explicit ban on federally approved drugs to treat opioid use disorder. So that's sort of where we have an impasse. The way we navigate that is we have an open dialogue with our with our project officers, our funders, and tell them about these challenges. So we kind of get a blessing to basically say, you can't win it all, but you keep that door open and make the changes that you can in areas in which you agree, and then use that as an opportunity to educate when they are willing and able to do so.
Okay, so this will be our last question for everyone. Do you have an example? And we can start, I don't know, I'll let someone decide who wants to start first. Do you have an example of a partnership failure or sort of a fall forward? So something that happened that was not, that you didn't think was, it didn't go the way it was supposed to at the time, but you ended up learning from it and that you would like to share with folks as an opportunity to sort of fail forward.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So we got a grant in 2020 to expand Blair in the school. And obviously we weren't in schools at that point. And so we were very eager, and this was in a really rural county. And so finally, by the time the fall of 2021 came around, we realized we were going to be able to go back in schools in person, right? So we go to the teacher staff meeting before school starts, and we're really excited to tell them about this program. And we go in just like, we're here, and here are all the things we can do to help your families. And it was totally blank stares from all of the staff. And I think what we kind of got some feedback afterwards, and we didn't get referrals, and it took us a really long time to figure out what was going on. But basically they were like, what are you doing here and why? We're just getting back to school. We're just getting all our kids back in person. Who are you? What are you trying to help? We're dealing with all these mental health issues with kids. We're dealing with kids that are behind and, all of these things. And so what we really learned, and we went back, and we brought donuts this time. But we also said, hey, we want to hear from you. Now that you have kids back, what are you seeing? What are you hearing about what's going on, from their families or from them? And so then we heard, we're actually seeing a lot of kids and families that are having homeless issues, that are couch surfing or having trouble paying their rent, or we've seen a rise in domestic violence situations, So we kind of heard them and we're like, hey, those are things we can help with. So we're hearing these are things that you're hearing and that you need. So this helps us to be able to kind of target some of the outreach we do with families and the information we put out. But also we can help. You don't have to handle this. You can refer this to us and this is something we can do. So I think we've all said it, but it's that value of really listening to what your partner's goals are and what they're trying to do, and then figuring out asset-wise how you can come together and meet it. But if you just go in and we were so excited and ready to go, and that just doesn't necessarily work all the time, especially in communities that have unique needs. Yeah, that's true.
So in that same community where the posh ski library told us we couldn't have our clinic, we had to find an alternative partner. And on paper, that library looked perfect. The libraries had been really successful in the past, but it taught me a lesson of listen to people when they say they don't want a partner too. Of that's okay. And then listen to the people that do. Because from that, we actually developed and kind of were able to build in a relationship with a really great victims advocate at the sheriff's office, which wouldn't have been my natural partner in my mind due to just some feelings around police and law enforcement within our communities that we're serving sometimes. But this individual happened to be in the courthouse, so people weren't having to go to the sheriff's office, and was a wonderful advocate and was willing to take on the role and provide the space. So I think listen to the people too. Listen when someone says they don't want a partner, and be open to people who do if they come in it generally with openness and with willingness to help.
That's great.
I would say, we've heard a lot today about remote, access and being able, working through COVID to reach people remotely. And I think that's great. I would just say a cautionary tale, I think in this state at least, is there are a lot of people who think that you are not respecting them if you don't come to their town. Mm-hmm. They want you to come to them. And it's a respect thing. It's a dignity thing. They want you to go, there. And we developed a training for working with Reverend Hughes and her nonprofit, Crisis Care Ministries. She's an ordained Methodist minister as well. And she's been helping set us up with all of these faith leaders all over Oklahoma. With research from the Pew Religious Landscape Study. And if you've never checked that out for your own state, it's very interesting. But when we started doing these trainings, there were folks who were, didn't want to do it remotely. They wanted you to come to them. And not everybody thought COVID was a thing. So, there were folks who didn't feel that was a deterrent for you to come talk to them in person. So there's always that, but that training that we developed, there were times when we had to go do it in person.
So for us, one of our main partnerships is with medical providers for people with opioid use disorder, and the top doctor is one of the people who refer clients to us. And he referred a client to us, and we ended up giving them advice. And the advice letter said something along the lines of, we cannot represent you in this custody matter because you are still in treatment. It really got him so mad. And he is the top doctor in Arkansas with the biggest, big organization, and he basically said, we will never work with you again. And of course this happens when I'm on vacation, so I come back and I try to do some damage control, and the first thing we did is to acknowledge that we are a work in progress. There's still a lot of this that we need to learn, and part of that is the stigmatizing language that we use in our practice that we are not aware. Would you kindly come to our staff and explain that to us so we can do better? And then in the same time, we also said, and in addition to that, it's not just the fact that the person is in treatment, it's the fact that they don't have stable housing, they don't have a job, and there's a lot of legal factors that go into a judge's decision. So we make a case acceptance level of service decision based on the likelihood of the outcome. However, we can do better if we work together, and that the relationship turned around. He is on my speed dial and I am on his, and everything as well.
Krista, I have a question for you, and it has to do with, one thing I see is you're the director, it's going to all be kind of the same question. You're the director of mission advancement. But it also seems like what you primarily deal with is disaster response. So I always think of disaster response more being that FEMA comes in to deal with the situation, help people get housing and so on. What kind of legal needs are there for people immediately when disaster response is involved?
That is a very good question, and that's part of what we train our faith leaders on when we meet with them, is why nobody intuitively thinks, oh, there's been a tornado, let's call the lawyers. Like, no one thinks that. So, you know, and when we first started doing this, like, the Red Cross didn't think that. You know, I mean, there were a lot of other nonprofits that had never really worked with legal aid before and didn't really realize why legal aid should be there. So there's that. With disaster response, you're looking at landlord-tenant problems almost immediately. The first case that walked into our office in 2013 after the EF5 tornado was a family law issue. It was an emergency custody modification. A parent didn't like their child being in a shelter and wanted to, you know, switch custody. Contractor fraud, huge problem. Granny's house is a big problem. Stephanie was talking earlier about, you know, the probate issues. And I thank heaven every day for Stephanie Hudson in Oklahoma Indian Legal Services and her staff, because when you apply for FEMA, if you don't own the house, you're not going to get any help. You have to be the record owner of the house. So we have a lot of generational housing ownership in Oklahoma, right? Granny lived there. Granny passed away. Your mom was her only heir. Now mom lives there. Mom passes away. Now you're the only legal heir, but you don't own the house. And so you apply to FEMA. Well, it's going to take us 8 to 10 to 3 months, you know, 8 to 10 weeks to 3 months to fix that. And while we're doing that, the black mold's growing up your walls. You know, I mean, that's going to really significantly, put back your ability to recover. And we see that all the time. And let's see, lost documents, tornadoes and floods, no shocker, are very effective at, you know, removing your checkbooks and throwing them 70 miles away, and your driver's license. And we've seen that happen as well. So it's a whole panoply of things. And FEMA doesn't respond to every disaster. Let me answer that part of your question. You know, you have low attention disasters or things that don't impact enough people, or they impact an area where the insured rate is so high. FEMA doesn't need to come in there and help those folks. So you don't always have them.
So I do agree that working with other organizations on the ground is such a godsend. I experienced it when running Rural Law Initiative. I had all these satellite offices in rural counties, and it was all through partner organizations that cared about the work that I did and just let me use a room in their offices. And it's just like brilliant to work with organizations on the ground that are already there assisting, and they're also mission aligned because they deeply care about the rural communities that you're trying to serve as well. My question as the foundation is how do you, what, is there any sort of formal way that you establish those relationships, and how do you keep them sustainable? And this is really just a general question for all of you, because for me, it was very ad hoc. Like I just did outreach and I presented my pitch, and I had a unique arrangement with every organization I worked with. Some of them required a memorandum of understanding. Some of them required a signing of a contract. Some of it was like grant partnership. So that we would like outsource some of the work and give them some of the funding from the grants that were funding my work. Like, how do you manage all that, particularly when you're like covering so many different communities?
Yeah, well, for ours, we have, you know, many different partnerships, and we rely on all of the above as you've mentioned. So we have contracts that support our medical legal partnerships. We have more informal memorandum of understanding that, sometimes talk about referrals and shared office space. And then there are sometimes partnerships on grants. So we will trade off between different community partners about who will apply for a competitive grant. And some, federal funding grants, you can only get it for a certain number of terms. So we can alternate who's going to be the lead. So I think, my experience has been those partnerships take a wide range of things. And it's really trying to figure out what the infrastructure is and how, do they in that asset mapping to see what makes the most sense and maintaining some flexibility in those areas.
So for us, in addition to those traditional formal tools of maintaining or creating partnerships, we built a two-way referral system. Essentially, that is, in addition to the standard helpline of the 2 legal aid programs that power the project, we created a special line just for the people we're trying to serve and a special online form for people to basically just want to refer their clients to us. So it's very low key, no big commitment for people who don't want to go through that MOU route or just formal partnerships, that our partnership is built on us helping their clients and our clients having access to their services.
And the only thing I would say following up on that is that the paperwork is not the hard part. The hard part is developing the relationship first. And if you start out, I think with the paperwork, you're probably not going to get very far. That would be, yeah.
Other questions? Anthony.
Chris, I was wondering if you ran into the same trust challenges with the first responder community. And if so, how did you deal with it?
Again, just time and pressure. You just keep showing up. We recently met in Des Moines, some of the Cargill grantees, and Josh Gall from Legal Aid in Iowa. He just kept saying that. He said, that's how you do it. You just keep showing up and you do what you say you're going to do, as somebody else mentioned, earlier, and you show them how helpful what you do is. And if you can help them achieve better outcomes for the clients they're already working with, they're coming to find you. Mm-hmm. Once they realized how important legal aid was to someone's recovery and how not having it could really, sabotage someone's recovery, they were all about, us being there. And we've been very, very fortunate. The disaster community is very close here and we work together really well, now. But at first, everybody, again, was like, why are the lawyers here? Who needs these people? But you had to explain to them why. And we did case management trainings, issue spotting trainings for case managers and presentations to the disaster community, whatever we could do, to just let people know we're here to help. Here's how we can help. Here's how we can help you achieve better outcomes for your folks as well.
We have time for a final question or two. Pilar.
So maybe following up on the same question Judge Bolger had a couple of panels ago, how do we nationalize this? This, keep reinventing the wheel every state at a time is a bit of a challenge, right? It's a massive barrier. A lot of work you guys are putting into it, and it's hopefully it's very successful. It'll be more successful. Is there some way to nationalize this approach with either national organizations like the American Red Cross? I know they've got, offices in every state, but at that national level, is there a model that we could support from the LSC, again, national level, to make your life a little bit easier or to make folks who want to try and replicate this across their state a little bit easier? So in addition to sharing these best practices, creating maybe a slightly different umbrella model to work within. So any thoughts on that, or, what would be a challenge with that from a barrier standpoint, or, what would be a downside to that? I mean, we don't want to parachute in, but if we can provide you with tools or other folks with tools, then, that might be another way to help replicate this a lot faster.
I can start. I'm not aware of any other faith-based outreach efforts. If there are, I would love to, to talk to them and work with them. But again, that Pew religious landscape study, when you look at faith in Oklahoma, it's like 89% of Oklahomans believe in God. 82% of Oklahomans attend church weekly or biweekly. It's a very, very high percentage of folks who are involved in the faith community here. People are going to go, from the research we've done that Reverend Hughes has done, folks are going to go to their friends and family first when they have a problem, and then they're going to go to their faith leader in rural Oklahoma. That's where they go. They're more likely to do nothing than to talk to a legal professional, by the way. Talk to a legal professional is 1%, and do nothing is 4%. So there you go. But you need to find, I think from our perspective, and Mary and I have talked about this, you need to find the Mary, the Reverend Hughes in your state, the person who's worked in emotional and spiritual care with your VOAD, the person who's really involved in the statewide faith organizations, who knows everyone, who can help connect you with all these different faith groups, like she's been able, to do for us. And she does it in other states. She worked nationally, so she's very good at it. But there's somebody in your state who can help you do this. And I'm happy to share all the materials I have, that anybody could make, pertinent for their own state, and talk to anybody about how we've been doing it. But the fact that you have faith leaders in Oklahoma who have like 195 contacts in their community every week talking to people. I mean, we've trained 309 ordained members of the clergy. 309 ordained members of the clergy times 195 contacts a week. That's a lot. I mean, they have a tremendous penetration into their community. So I just think it's a really very effective way to establish trust in all these communities. And people just haven't done it. And and again, if we hadn't stumbled into it, we wouldn't be either. I mean, it just kind of happened. So, but it's doable.
So it's very hard to nationalize projects like Beyond Opioids without funding, right? So to the extent that we could be helpful, we just give you a copy of our application, point you to where the sources are. So you need seed funding to do that. Another way, absent of that, through LSC, I suppose, one way to do it is through performance measures, to include the prioritization of substance uses, people with substance use disorder, and the services we've done would be another way, I think, to do it.
I would say insofar as nationalizing something, I think it would be helpful if we thought as a legal aid community a little bit more about building sort of transformative systems for the delivery of legal aid versus viewing ourselves as law firms. And if we really sort of reconceptualized what we were doing as legal aid lawyers as a delivery system for this product of legal aid, I think then it would transform, it would change us, we would start thinking about it differently and thinking about it and that change would make it easier to maintain the partnerships and share infrastructure instead of trying to build our own law firms in every community.
I think it's hard. I think you can nationalize the models and like the ideas of like hold Krista and each program up as being like, this is an example of how you can build these partnerships, but partnerships should be individualized. They should be community specific. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to nationalize that, but I do think you can give examples. Like no one thought about it until somebody did it. And then, someone hears Krista talking going, oh, that would work for my community. I have similar demographics. But I think showing models, but then procedure. How do you build partnerships in a way that's sustainable and collaborative and respectful? Because I think those are the tools, but really the partnership needs to reflect the community you're trying to serve. And that component of it can't be nationalized.
I think sharing the ideas at conferences and through grants. And I know there are after our Lawyer in the School program, there were other programs that reached out to us because they were applying for grants to fund Lawyer in the School programs. And the LSC staff is great about making those connections and continuing to fund that work. When the model works somewhere else, it might really work in a different community. It might look a little different. It might have to have a different, bent to it. But that infrastructure, what works, those lessons shared are so valuable. And LSC does a great job of making those connections, but continuing to foster that, I think would be wonderful.
That's a great way to end.